Hey, Legal Rebels, this is Tom Martin. I'm the founder of LawDroid, and this is my podcast, LawDroid Manifesto, where I interview legal innovators about how they do what they do.
In this episode, I interview Nicole Black, attorney, author, and legal innovation strategist who has merged her love of technology and legal acumen to educate and empower lawyers. Welcome to the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. My name is Tom Martin. I'm your host, and I'm really thrilled today to have Nicole Black with me. She is an innovator. She's written about technology for years. She's also an award winner, ABA Women of Legal Tech, ABA Legal Rebel, and a Fast Case 50 honoree. I'm really excited to have her with us and to learn more about her and share that with you. With that, Nicole, if you could tell us a little bit about what you're up to now.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. I am the principal legal insight strategist at AffiniPay, which is the parent company of MyCase, LawPay, DocketWise, and CasePeer. And I've been with MyCase. I was employee number one. I was hired in 2012. So it was me and the founders. And so I've been with MyCase since then. And we were acquired by, most recently, AffiniPay in 2022. So that's what I am, and that's what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, I saw that everything's gotten kind of unified under AffiniPay now. But you're with MyCase for over a dozen years, right?
Right. Yep. 2012 is when I was hired. And 6 months after I was hired, they were acquired by AppFolio, which is where MyCase was for about 8 years.
And we'll get to it a little later, but I do also want to mention, I forgot to mention at the top that you've written 3 books about cloud computing, social media that you wrote with Carolyn Elephant, and criminal law too.
Yep. Criminal law in New York. Yep. A substantive criminal law. So that one was about not procedural, but like the elements of the crimes. And I wrote that for a decade. I co-authored it with a local judge.
Wow. And so I would like to go back. Let's go back to the beginning. We're, I think, just a year apart in going to university and law school. And you had a bachelor's degree in psychology and religion, right?
I majored in religion, minored in psych, and it was this phenomenon of religion, not religious studies. So, the sociology, the psychology, the philosophy of religion as a thing.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I majored in philosophy, so I thought that was kind of cool. You were maybe at the time dealing with some like the bigger questions that were on your mind.
Well, I happened upon that by accident. I knew I wanted to go to law school, and I was just taking courses that interested me, and a lot of them happened to be cross-referenced with religion. But I would take, Greco-Roman society, or the immigrant Jew in America. I took a course in the Holocaust. I took another course on the classics. I somehow, when it came to my junior year and I wasn't sure what major I wanted to declare, I realized that I'd practically satisfied that major by accident. So I just had all the courses switched over to religion from whatever you could sign up as a history or philosophy or whatever. And I just had them all covered under the religion major. And I only had to take like 2 more courses to actually complete the major. So that was really just by happenstance. And I think it helped for law school applications because there are a lot of poli-sci majors, right? Not a lot of religion.
So I know you're in Rochester now. Did you grow up in Rochester?
I was born in Dallas, and from age 5 on, was in Syracuse, and went to undergrad in Rochester, law school in Albany. And of the 3, I liked Rochester the best, and I knew I didn't want to go to Buffalo, live in Buffalo. So I picked Rochester and came back after law school.
Cool. And, when you decided to go, and it seems like kind of by happenstance with religion and psychology, but was there any influence from your parents that kind of led you in that direction, or what do you think brought you to that?
Well, the father that raised me, my mom married him when I was 7. He's a physician. He comes from a family of physicians. My mom is now a nurse practitioner, was a nurse at the time. Uh, and so, the dinner conversations between them were not exactly notable or interesting, in my opinion. It was gross stuff, right? But they had some friends who were lawyers. Ed Mencken, who recently died, he was one of my mentors, and then Sidney Kaminsky's. Ed was a criminal defense, and he also did PI work. And Sidney's like one of the best known med mal people in that part of New York. And their stories were interesting, right? So they sort of influenced me to, and science and math were not my thing, like a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people that became lawyers. That's part of why they ended up in law school. And so I knew I was going to go to law school, and I just needed some liberal arts. And I was going to major in psychology, but I think statistics is probably, I think I had to take statistics and I didn't want to. So I ended up minoring in it. Anything to avoid numbers, which I unfortunately encountered a lot in my at post law school, a lot more than I thought I would have had expected to. So
Yeah.
unfortunately, they don't go away.
Yeah, I think math is the bane of a lot of lawyers' existence. Um, well, that's interesting because not everyone from an early age is like, I want to go to law school, I want to be a lawyer. So part of it was that you found those conversations to be more interesting. Um, the people that you knew at the time, were there any other influences that kind of led you down that path to law?
Well, because I grew up in Syracuse, Syracuse is not a thriving business center. So the majority of people that were represented success, if you will, in Syracuse, however you want to define that, um, were doctors and lawyers. I mean, there's not much else there. There's not a lot of industry. And, you know, adults in my life that I talked to about it were like, well, I don't know. I would literally say, Dr. Lawyer, like, what else are you going to be? Like it's sort of odd, but I think it just was the mindset of where I grew up in. And there just weren't a lot of opportunities for other types of careers, or at least it didn't seem like it. So that was part of it too, but it really was more, I had considered marketing. Like when I took those tests in high school, marketing and law were at the very top. And I felt like marketing was too superfluous. Like I wanted to do something that mattered and made a difference in people's lives. And uh, oddly enough, I've ultimately kind of ended up in some ways doing a cross between the two. Now that I'm part of a tech company, and I've always been part of the marketing team in a unique way. But, one of the primary reasons I really did want to go to law school versus try to pursue something like that in a nebulous way, because I didn't even know what that looked like, marketing. I felt like marketing was just too superfluous in my mind. It wasn't impactful enough on the world. And being a lawyer certainly sounds like it's going to be. Doesn't always turn out to be that way, but it feels like it's going to, when you go to law school. So,
Yeah, I think a lot of us, pursue the law because we wanted to help people and make the world a better place, and then kind of like the world intercedes,
right.
but we have the best of intentions. Um, so, one of your jobs early on was as a public defender, right? So
Yeah.
you did go into the world with that intention, and you worked as a public defender. If you could talk a little bit about what that experience was like. Was that fresh out of law school?
Well, I graduated in 95, and that was a recession. It was a pretty bad recession, if you recall. So when I graduated, it was hard to get a job. I knew I wanted to be in the public defender's or the DA's office. I'd kind of decided I didn't want to do the DA's because I'd interned there in law school. And there were one or two cases where I definitely questioned the discretion of the prosecutors in certain types of cases. Like I thought that they overly prosecuted, and I was increasingly drawn to the defense side. So when I got to Rochester, uh, people that I knew, that getting those jobs has to do with connections sometimes, happened to have more connections with the public defender's office. So that was easier for me to get my foot in the door. And that was also what I was sort of leaning towards anyway. And so, it was a recession. So I started waitressing at Olive Garden part-time and interning for free in the appeals department of the public defender's office. And I had to do that for a year because there was no turnover. Nobody was leaving because the job market was so bad. So people just were sitting where they were in their jobs. And it was an unusual time. Usually there's a lot more turnover in both the PD's and the DA's offices. So I, waitressed. I had to eat crow, if you will. And I remember one time one of the cooks who happened to be on parole yelled at me and said, "How are you going to represent people's lives if you can't even get an order straight?" And he definitely had a point. I was a horrible waitress. I was fortunately a much better lawyer, and um, that worked out for me. But I eventually got hired after a year. And during the time before I got hired, I wrote appeals. I worked on appeals and, reviewed transcripts and wrote and argued appeals. And then I was hired, and I was with the PDs for 3 years after that in the city, town courts, and then in city courts. And I was about to graduate, if you will, into handling nonviolent felonies. Not just, I handled them at their initial stages like arraignment, but after that it would get bumped up to nonviolent felony or violent felony attorneys. And so I was about to get bumped up to that stage, and I decided that I was getting really burnt out. We had a caseload of 600 at the time per person, which is one of the highest in the country, I think, at the time, but definitely in the state.
Wait a second. 600 cases?
Yeah, 600 misdemeanors. So when you were in town courts, you were handed 600 files because they got arraigned at all different times. But in city court, they'd put you in part one, and all the new criminal intakes, if you will, all the people accused of crimes would get arraigned. Probably 2/3 of them would get assigned to the public defender because they couldn't afford somebody. And so you, as the public defender, would take everybody in city court that got arraigned that qualified for the PD, and that was usually around 600 people. And then you spent the next 6 months moving through the parts, getting rid of those cases. So when part 6, I think it was, I can't even remember at this point, but whatever the part where you had jury trials and bench trials, when I had jury trials scheduled, I had 5 of them. We called it stacked. 5 of them we didn't know which one was going to go. It all depended on which witnesses showed up, which ones didn't, if your client's bench warranted. So I had to be prepared for 5 different, I use the word prepared loosely, because how do you prepare for 5 trials? And half the time the clients aren't reachable. Back then, there weren't cell phones. And so you'd get, either the numbers didn't work or you'd get voicemails. So, you just had to think on your feet. And so all the jury trials that I did, with the exception of one in town court, I had no idea what was going to go. Most of the time I hadn't talked to my clients, and it was a fantastic experience. But when I say I burnt out, you burn out. Like, it's just, and you're not doing your clients justice. You're really committing malpractice constantly, because you can't represent 600 people on misdemeanors. Like, you just can't do it. Not the way they should and deserve to be represented, for sure.
Yeah. But I could see how that initial experience working so many cases, like, yes, there's the burnout, but there's also like that realization of like limits and what's good for me, and like, do I want this? And, all of those hard questions that we deal with usually when we're young and we are just doing it because we're told to do it.
Right. Yep. For sure. So I decided, I actually had considered leaving the law then, but I have a cousin who's a lawyer here in Rochester, and he convinced me, you need to try some civil law and practice other areas of law before you really decide law is not for you. And so I got a job with a civil litigation firm in Rochester that also had some of the most well-known criminal defense lawyers as well, which is one of the reasons I really liked it. So I was able to continue to handle I could take assigned counsel cases, and I could also help them with like these major felony cases that they had taken on. In addition to civil work. And we did both plaintiff and defense. So we represented insurance companies were our clients on a lot of the litigation cases, like slip and falls and car accidents. But the firm was lucky enough to have set it up with the insurance companies that they could also be plaintiff's attorneys. So we also had plaintiff's matters that we handled too, equally. So it's an interesting place to continue to do criminal defense work, but also civil litigation. And I was there for almost another 4 years. So that was a good experience too. It was different.
In terms of that experience, like, working within the frame of a law firm, like, did you enjoy it? Certainly I would think it's much more enjoyable than the public defender's office, but did you get the kind of like value from partners? Like, was there a kind of a separation between the two, as there are in some firms? Was it more collegial? Like, what was your experience of that?
Well, honestly, I think I liked the public defenders a lot better. You had all of your colleagues that were your age, and we all went out, and there was a lot of camaraderie, and I believed a lot more in what I was doing there. Civil litigation, personal injury cases, not my, that doesn't get me excited. I know there's value in that work, but for me personally, I found a lot more value in the criminal defense stuff. The other problem, the thing that was very challenging in that firm for me, this was back in early, 99 is when I went to the firm, and I was there till 2003. It was a firm with like 20 lawyers. There was one woman partner. And I think when I was hired, I was the only other woman attorney. I'm pretty sure I was. Um, and there were a lot of things I encountered there that I didn't encounter at the public defenders. Like one of the partners told me I should wear more colorful suits. Another partner told me I shouldn't take on so many criminal defense cases because why would I need to go to the jail? Why go to the jail if I don't need to? And then like the reason I left the firm was that was sort of the kicker, but it was a big part of the problem I had with that firm was I'd gone out on maternity leave because I'd had my first daughter. And when I came back, they gave me the same caseload, but I was allowed to work 4 days a week instead of 5 with the same caseload. But the commission basis had changed, so I still had to make the same amount of commission that I'd made. There was a base salary, but then you'd get a bonus at the end of the year if you brought in a certain amount, and that amount didn't change. So even though they gave me a full caseload and paid me part-time, I still had to bring extra in above and beyond sort of what I was supposed to be handling to make commission, which is okay, that's fine. But when it came time for annual reviews, another person who'd been hired after me, but it was a good friend of mine, and he did have more experience than I had coming in. They promoted him to partner, and one of the partners that was my mentor told me he just fits in. You're going to be promoted next year. They all said I'd be promoted next year. But then during the annual review of the managing partner, he said the quiet part out loud, which was, if you hadn't taken maternity leave, we probably would have made you partner this year, which was, actually, that I could have brought a lawsuit if I'd had that recorded, but I didn't, but I wouldn't have anyway. But I also I handled employment discrimination matters for the firm. Like I litigated those matters. So I knew it was illegal. I don't think he knew that what he said out loud was illegal. But so I gave notice 2 weeks later and just decided that, I'm going to have my next kid and I'm just going to figure out where I go from there. So I took 2.5 years off, which I don't think I would have done if that hadn't been said at the review. That was really disheartening. And I decided I was done. Like that just was not worth it to me. So.
Yeah, I totally feel you. That's, hopefully things have changed in the past, few years, interceding years, but that kind of stuff still happens, and it's a terrible thing because really talented people like yourself, they lose people like you, and it's really unfortunate for them too. Like,
yeah,
the short-sightedness of it. After you left the law firm, is that when you went to go work for the county bar, or was that because you took a couple of years off, like you said, and then I think you went to go work for the bar association in Monroe?
No, I have that on my LinkedIn because I founded the technology committee. And so I was the chair of that for 3 years. And then I was on the board of trustees for 3 years. So that was much later in my career path. But no, I took 2.5 years off, and I read an article at that time that said that when I had my second daughter, and when she was about 18 months old, I read an article that said that women who have professional degrees who take time off, that 3 years is a really important time, post, after you take time off, because both from the psychological perspective of the woman and from an employer's perspective, once you get past 3 years, it starts to become a lot more challenging to enter the workplace. And when I read that article, I was at about 2.5 years. So I decided to hang a shingle. And by the way, just to sort of explain how I ended up in technology, a really, really quick timeline. My dad brought home a TRS-80 computer when I was 11, and I programmed it in BASIC to learn how to play Pong because that was the only way to make the thing work. And then when I was in college, I took a computer programming class. And I learned how to program in Pascal because I thought that was interesting. And then when I was with the law firm, right before I left, I told them, you need to have a website. The World Wide Web is a thing, and there's lawyers on this online. And they said, well, we'll let you make a website for us. And I bought Dreamweaver, and you can count that time so we won't penalize you like for your billable hours or something. So I made a website. They bought me Dreamweaver. I made a website for free for them, and I left a couple. And then another thing that one of the partners said to another partner, "Did you see the website Nikki made for us?" And he said, "Yeah, but no one hires lawyers on the internet." So like right in front of me, one of the partners said that, and I knew, I knew what was coming. So and in 1995, I skipped this part. When I was waiting to get after I graduated law school and was going to move to Rochester and studying for the bar, my mom was going to grad school at SU and she had internet access. So I had internet access in 95 when a lot of people didn't. And I created a website then. That's how I learned HTML. And I met my husband online in 95 and he moved up here in 96 and we eventually got married. We met on GeoCities. Have you ever heard of, remember GeoCities,
Yeah,
their websites?
I remember.
They had 2 chat rooms. It was one of the only sets of chat rooms on the internet. There may be 4 chat rooms on the whole internet back then. And we met in one of their chat rooms. So I've always been interested in technology. And so when I decided to hang a shingle, I made a website for myself because I already knew how to do that. I went to lunch with that same cousin who convinced me to wait a while before I left the practice of law. And as he was walking away, he looked over his shoulder after I told him what I was going to do, like hang a shingle, do contract work for other lawyers. He said, "I heard about this thing called blogging on NPR this morning. You might want to check that out." So I researched blogs. I'm like, I'm going to start a blog. So I hung my virtual shingle, started a blog, and started writing about appellate cases as they came down in New York to show that I was up on the time, the changes, that I could write well, that I could, analyze cases. And from there, that's how I started to meet everybody in the industry, because there were only a handful of legal bloggers in 2005. And a lot of those are my really close friends, my co-author, Carolyn Elephant. So that's sort of how I ended up where I am now. And that's sort of began the next stage of my career.
Thank you so much for that. Like, yes, you definitely anticipated one of my questions there. The TRS-80, like I know I cut my teeth on an Atari 1200 XL, learning
Yes.
Basic 2, and it was a lot of fun. It was exciting back then, right?
Yeah, it was very cool. Except I never really did get into I don't know if it's because I was a girl and mostly that was like boys that did that, or if, I don't know why. I never really got into the gaming back then. I never really liked gaming, I guess. I don't know if it was a boy-girl thing, like a male-female thing. I think it may have just never really been my thing. And that was really the way to get into it back then, I think, was the gaming.
Maybe. I mean, like, I was always on my Atari 2600 playing games, and even though they were like really, really terrible graphics in comparison, you could find at the arcade.
Yeah. Yeah, it was more the arcade, like Ms. Pac-Man and Frogger. I used to love Frogger. I'd go to the arcade to do those things rather than on like a computer. Yeah.
Yeah. Video games and pizza. It was fun times.
Yeah.
So, okay, I get it. You had the early interest in technology, some actual experience, like, interacting with computers, getting them to do stuff that you'd like them to do. Like, I think for me too, that sense of agency, that you could actually use these things to amplify yourself, like do more. And that was very exciting. So, and then carrying it through to the law firms and, seeing that ahead of everyone else. So I get all that, but then making the transition into, like, how did it come to work for my case? Like, how did that opportunity come up?
Well, so before that, the other thing I should have mentioned, when my kids were really little, I sold stuff on eBay. So I've always been like, I would sell their clothes. I created a store and I would sell lots of clothes. I'd go to Goodwill and buy them to make some money while I wasn't working. But so I've always I sort of understood at the time the online e-commerce. And so I was always interested in that type of stuff. And so when I started writing about, initially I just started writing about cases, but then I started writing about blogging and I started speaking at the local bar association and writing for them. And then the local legal newspaper. And then they asked me one day, they just reached out and said, well, pay you to write a column. So I've been writing a column for them ever since. And I transitioned from writing about New York legal issues to the intersection of law and tech. And so I wrote about blogging. I wrote about social media and the different platforms as they came along. I wrote about mobile computing and apps as they came along. And then cloud computing. I saw this thing coming. And so I'd met Carolyn. She, at some conferences like Tech Show, I started getting free passes, right? And then I started getting asked to speak. And when you're asked to speak, oftentimes they pay your way. So I sort of graduated, and then I started wanting to get paid to speak. So I'd gotten to this point in the industry where I'd go to all these things, meet all these people. That's how I was a co-author with Carolyn. That's how I pitched my cloud computing book. And in 2012, there was a big contract that Carolyn and I had where some company had hired us to, there was a pretty significant portion of my income, and hired us to write a legal blog post about legal tech. And that ended at the end of 2011. And that was a big shortcoming for me. And all of a sudden, my husband was struggling to get overtime as a nurse, which he'd always had no problem to get. So all of a sudden, for the first time in our lives, we sort of had a financial crunch that we weren't expecting. And I wasn't going to go to Legal Week that year, Legal Tech at the time in New York, because I'm like, I can't afford it. It's going to be the first year I skip since I kind of got into this space. And at the last minute, somebody got sick. And so someone asked me to fill in a panel like a week before. So I was like, well, I've never spoken there, so I've got to go to Legal Week. My book was just about to be published, my cloud computing book. And so I went, and I wore my press hat. You know, I had because I always go to those conferences wearing press hats, if you will. And I met with the MyCase guys, reached out to me because I said on Twitter I was going to be there. And I'd met them once before, and I'd written about them, and I wasn't really impressed because they marketed it as social media practice management, which I thought just was stupid, quite frankly. I'm like, that doesn't even make any sense. And that's how they were marketing their platform. And I knew the guys from Clio. I was writing for Clio at the time, actually. And Rocket Matter, like their CEOs had talked to me for the book, and I quoted them in my book. And so I got to Legal Week, and I met with the MyCase guys again because they'd reached out. And I just refinanced our mortgage using a portal, and I'd never used an online portal before. And so they had a portal built into MyCase from day one, which I hadn't really realized the first time I met with them. And I was really impressed with that. And so I wrote about them, but then Matt, I don't know if you know Matt, one of the founders, he's very charismatic, and he convinced me to sit through a demo a couple of weeks later, a virtual demo. And during that demo, he offered to hire me to continue doing what I'm doing, kind of evangelize the cloud is how he put it. Writing and speaking externally about the cloud and technology, but as Nikki with MyCase. And so that's how I was initially hired. And then 6 months later, MyCase was acquired by Appfolio, but that was also in part due to, not fully, obviously, there was a whole process where due diligence process for the software and everything before they acquired it. But Klaus Schauser, who was the founder of GoToMeeting and GoToMyPC, who then founded Appfolio, had reached out to me a couple of years prior because they were vetting the legal tech space then. And I had a whole phone call with him and told him, they're not ready for the cloud. You got to wait a couple of years. So when Matt had met him for lunch and mentioned that he just hired me, Klaus remembered me. He's like, I know Nikki. And so I think that helped them take a second look at the product. And so they acquired us 6 months later. And so that was sort of, I started working in April 2012 for MyCase. So, and we were acquired in October that year by Appfolio.
I want to ask you a little bit though, like going back to the beginning of what you were saying right now, is those, like the initial moves that we make, the initial decisions and like the whys behind those decisions. I'm curious, like that kind of like curiosity that you had in the first place about blogging, about like, because somebody could have heard that remark from your friend and been like, oh, okay, yeah, whatever, blogging. But but the curiosity that you undertook obviously to look into it and learn more about it, and the fact that you're excited about it and that you pursued it, like where does that drive come from? Do you have a parent where that kind of mirrors that, or like is this something unique to yourself? Like where does that sense of curiosity and that entrepreneurship drive come from?
Well, I've always been fascinated by technology, and like unlike you, I didn't end up developing or creating things, right? But I've always been really fascinated by it. I've always really enjoyed like Star Trek: The Next Generation got me through law school. Like I've always loved science fiction, and the possibilities of technology have always, I think Star Trek really spurred that in me. But I'm fascinated by the possibility of technology, and I don't know what it is about it, but it really it's something I get really excited about. And so that's why every time something new comes along, I get so excited about the possibility. And what I'm good at is identifying if this is a thing or not. I can say this is a thing, but then I can't be like, oh, let me develop something to work, to leverage this thing. First, that's not what I do. That's not what I'm good at. That's what people like you are better at. I'm better at identifying things, sifting through them, noticing patterns, figuring out kind of what's going to happen, what's going to be big in our industry because of my backdrop. Like, I don't know. I tend to be curious about anything. I always want to know answers about everything. Like, the iPhone's been a godsend, because if someone in a bar says something and you're like, I don't know, what's the answer? I'm like, I'm going to find out right now. And I get a little, all of a sudden I'm in the middle of a conversation trying to find the answer. So I think I've always been that way. My older daughter is going to school to be a librarian, so I think, and she has the same thing. So that's definitely what librarians like to do. I'm not sure where it comes from, but it has to be something I'm particularly interested about, to have a prolonged level of research versus just getting the quick answer. And technology and how it impacts the practice of law, just has been a sweet spot for me. And I love thinking about it, talking about it, writing about it, speaking about it, to colleagues, to lawyers. Being in a tech company that's, on the cutting edge of it, it's really exciting.
So then being able to do that, in my case, as a legal tech evangelist, what are some of those experiences over that span of, I think, about 10 years that you were doing that? What was that like?
Well, it's the entire ride has been very interesting, because I was not interested in business ever. I honestly didn't even know what C-level meant for years with my case. I didn't understand like what a C meant, and, chief meant, that meant C-level, that was I understood they were like the bosses and they ran the company, but just the structures of companies were not something that even really was on my radar, because I never cared about it. And so it took me a while to even get used to the corporate structure and the way corporations work. And I think one of the hardest things for me over time that I'm much better at now is getting used to the change that happens when new leadership comes in, trying to figure out how to make my position understood, because depending on who's coming in, they may or may not understand what it is that I'm even doing and why it has any value. So I've always tried very hard to walk a fine line. I don't want to be a product evangelist, but I do want to find ways to make sure that the work that I'm doing creates exposure for the company, familiarity. So if someone is in the market for law practice management software and they start doing the research, like, oh, I've heard of my case. And people tell me this has happened. Oh, right, Nikki wrote about that. And well, I trust Nikki. Let me see what she said. You know what I mean? Like, I've read her articles before. So I try to walk that fine line of not evangelizing the product, but evangelizing the technology and helping lawyers understand tech, and also being a trusted source, like a trusted neutral source, which I think is why I've been able to write my ABA journal column for so long. People know that I'm not just up there trying to sell them our product, although I will occasionally mention that it does this, but so do our competitors. Like, I tried very hard to be neutral in that respect, but I also try to do as much as I can, because my company pays my salary, and I've gotten all sorts of wonderful benefits being part of a tech company over the years. And there was an IPO with Appfolio, and we've had, 2 different acquisitions since I've been with my case. And every single one of those is very beneficial to me. And my kids are in college, and that certainly helped pay for that. So, I have a job to do for the company as well. So I try very, very hard to walk that fine line, and also internally provide a lot of value. And that's increased a lot over the years as people start to, especially Affinipay, they very much understand the industry, because LawPay's been in the industry since 2005. So, they're finding ways to leverage my industry knowledge and expertise about practice of law and stuff. So it's really been really great.
So I know that your new position at Affinipay is as a legal insight strategist. And I think from everything that you're talking about, I mean, it's really building on that foundation of that experience, the understanding of the market, and putting it all together to kind of that title gives voice to what you've been doing this whole time, is giving people insights about what's real, what's not, what the value is, with the heart of a journalist, that, your curiosity and excitement about the industry. Tell me a little bit about what that's been like. Has it felt different?
Well, I think it's been a gradual change even before my title changed. Since I've been with Affinipay, which has been since June of 2022, they have people at Affinipay that understand the industry really well. That understand the bar relationships and why those matter, and understand the industry itself, like the practice of law. They have Claude, who has been doing like a CLE program there, another attorney for a long time. So coming in, I think it was just easier for them to understand ways to leverage what I do. And I now report to Gabriela Cubiero. She's the former CEO of CasePeer. And so I couldn't, there's no one else I would rather report to, because she, of course, understands, the value that I bring and the potential value and the things that I can do. So that's really helped as well. So some of the things that I've been doing gradually over time that are a little different than before, or doing more often, are sometimes providing internal presentations on the market, or on, like, this is what a criminal defense practice looks like, or this is what I'm going to do one soon on this is what bar associations disciplinary process, and who ethics, and who's, it's not law firms that have a disciplinary action against them, it's lawyers. There's a lot of things that people just don't understand, and it's confusing. So I'm going to do a presentation on that. So I do that. I also have increasingly worked, like with the AI initiative. I was one of the people that was part of this team that strategized from the very outset to get a sense of what it would look like in the industry from a very high level, right? I'm just to give advice and insight, so that once we got teams hired and figuring out what to focus on at the very beginning, and now they have we have entire teams, and they're growing really quickly. People will reach out to me with specific questions about specific issues, or a specific process, like if we're trying to develop a certain type of function. What do these terms actually mean? Like, if we're going to be speaking the lawyer's language, or how does this process actually work in a firm? Are we doing this right? Or are there other resources that we could potentially use to make sure that we're doing this right, especially as we're developing starting to really build out the AI. So I do a lot of that as well now, especially in relation to the AI, because you really do need the practitioner's insight to make sure that the documents that are being used to provide accurate output, are appropriate and stuff. So it's I've increasingly been doing that as well. And then sometimes I also will, not a ton, but speak at sponsored sessions, lunch and learns, especially at some of the more major conferences. So it really runs the gamut. And on top of that, I do my external speaking, where people approach me separately. On my writing, I write my columns. And I also, I'm considered a legal tech journalist, and I help maintain a lot of those relationships and all the other industry relationships, like with PMAs, that are really important. So it's kind of a broad scope job.
Well, it sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, I love it. I'm very lucky. And I do a lot of travel, for better, for worse these days. Air travel's become horrible, but.
So one question I have for you about that is, given all of your experience and your powers of discernment from that, is generative AI a thing? Is it real? Is it not real? Like, is it actually going to contribute value to the industry?
I agree with, essentially, there's a quote from Bill Gates where he said that, and I'm paraphrasing, this is an exact quote, but he basically said he thinks that it was PCs, the internet, and then then generative AI, like everything in between, which completely revolutionized the practice of law, is nothing compared to the impact of generative AI. So, and I agree 100% with him. Like, the things that I banked my career on that got me where I am, social media, mobile computing, cloud computing, were incredibly significant and absolutely fundamentally changed the practice of law, and the marketing practices, and everything that goes into running a law firm. But this is just next level. It is going to significantly impact, I think, everybody's job, the way that they get their work done, how quickly they get it done. It's also going to impact consumers, and whether they even need lawyers, and in what situations they're going to need lawyers. So it's significant. I mean, this is really going to change things quickly. And there's a article I just saw from the Harvard Business Review that I shared with a bunch of my legal tech journalist friends, that had a timeline that like 262 experts or something from multiple fields all agreed to about what was going to happen. And it basically ends up like, in 2070 something, AI reaching a singularity, for better or for worse for us, and no one knows where that's going to go. But that was something they all agreed on, and I think that's 100% accurate. In the interim, there's all sorts of flux that's going to be happening. Some of it's going to be unpleasant. But
yeah, the singularity being when I think Ray Kurzweil, right, was talking about the singularity, where AI reaches at least a human level intelligence and then surpasses it.
Right. And, anyone who watches any kind of sci-fi knows that that doesn't always go well. It has the potential to completely go sideways, especially when if people yell at their Alexas the way I do. I scream at it and swear at it sometimes, and I shouldn't. But I'm probably not her best friend at this point. So
Yeah.
that's why I welcome the robot overlords all the time on LinkedIn now, just to hedge my bets.
Well, be careful. She's right behind me and she keeps me on track with my appointments. So don't want to set her off.
Behind me
Uh,
too. I was afraid I was going to.
so, all right, there's been a lot going on with AI, and I don't really want to get into all of that because it changes practically every single day. But one thing I would like to ask you about, which I think would be very helpful for people that are watching and listening, is what words of advice would you have for people that are they're coming up right now and they're dealing with this kind of like a chaos situation where, we have the practice of law as we've known it, then we have AI, and it is going to make structural changes to it. From your perspective, like what words of advice would you have for younger law graduates?
Well, what I tell everybody to do whenever I speak to lawyers about AI is create, if I don't even know if you have to create, you don't have to create a ChatGPT account. Use ChatGPT every day and just play with it and figure out what it does and figure out how it might help you. Um, Obviously, all those caveats about output accuracy and whatever, but play with it, figure out how it works, figure out what generative AI does so that you have a foundational understanding to help you make educated decisions about whether to use it and in what situations to use it. And so for law graduate or practicing attorney, I think everybody should absolutely try it out. And for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks set a time frame, use it every single day just to get a sense of what it does. And for law graduates, I mean, I'm not sure I would even recommend people go to law school at this point. I was on the fence before generative AI, but now I think that it is law schools are going to have to fundamentally change the way that they educate students, because a lot of those functions, initial um, initial jobs that people take to train them, oftentimes in these large law firms are going to disappear. And the law firms, I'm not sure how people are going to get that initial understanding of the practice of law and what it looks like in whatever field they're going into, other than like the litigation fields. And even then, you know, you, they're not going to ask you to summarize a deposition. They're going to have the AI do it. That's how I kind of figured out what a deposition was, by attending them and reading the deposition transcripts and summarizing them. So I don't really know what that's going to look like. And I think that the education system is going to have to change. We're going to have some sort of like almost residency like they have in the medical field. And I think the law schools are going to have to lead the charge, because soon these graduates are going to be unemployable, in my opinion. I think it's going to be a really difficult market if they don't have it training in AI and some sort of other type of training. I could be wrong.
I don't think so. It's a rough time. And it's rough because unlike every time in the past, it's not just a recession where like you write it out. Um, it's an unknown. And when it's an unknown, it's a little bit more difficult to strategize about how to deal with it. Um, well, one thing I like to ask everyone I talk to, because everyone that I get to talk to is a bit of an overachiever, has a lot going on, and I know I know that you do. Um, how do you keep things going? Like, how do you balance everything? I know you even have a new puppy that is part of part of the things that you juggle. So how do you make it happen?
Well, my kids are in college, but that's a fairly recent phenomenon. Well, one of them just graduated, but I mean, I think that if you are married and have a family, you've got to, regardless of your gender, you've got to have a partner that's on board with you, that is willing to split all of the obligations of raising a family. And if you don't have children, either way, you still have to have like motivation to do things every day. You have to be have a lot of passion about whatever it is that you're working on. And the things that you do on a daily basis need to continue to be interesting to you. Otherwise, you burn out. Um, I mean, I don't know how I mean, I have a very set routine. I don't know. I do the exact same thing every day in the exact same order unless something disrupts it. Um, I like it that way. And um, I mean, I don't know. I think a lot of it is just having that routine and making sure that the things that I'm thinking about actually interest me, because that makes it feel doesn't feel like work a lot of the time.
What is that, by the way? What is your routine, if you don't mind sharing?
Well, in the mornings, I initially just check out LinkedIn mostly because I've gotten off of most of the other social media platforms at this point. Check LinkedIn, see what's going on there and what I have to respond to, and check out some other people's posts that are in my network and like or comment on them because that's part of being doing social media appropriately, and making sure that you're connecting with your network. And then I, check emails to see if there's anything really pressing that I need to do right away. Usually I deal with that stuff in the afternoon, and then I go through my RSS feed and um, save some things that I may include in a roundup. Others are ideas of things to write about. Others are just things that are happening and trending. Um, Others I'll share with internally on some of our Slack channels, or I'll share with my legal tech journalist friends, depending on what it is. So the morning is just catching up on everything that's happened since the day before. And then I go back to LinkedIn and I also post to LinkedIn at some point in the morning, usually right at the very beginning. So I go back, check out my posts, respond to anybody that's said something, interact a few more times with some other people just to make sure I've covered my bases with my network. And then that usually takes all morning because a lot of that is a big part of what I do. And then in the afternoon, I deal with whatever tasks might be in my inbox. Um, Usually have something that I have to write with a looming deadline, so I write that in the afternoons. I have a lot of meetings in the afternoons too because uh, people in my company are either in California or Texas, so they're behind me. So mornings are really quiet, and then the afternoons start to become busier. And a bunch of like for 3 weeks in October, I'm going to be in Austin, so I also have a lot of travel. So that's when I try to get everything done around the travel. So when I'm traveling, I don't have much to do other than whatever the reason I'm traveling for is. Um, but so that's sort of what it ends up looking. I do podcasts preferably in the afternoon and any other kinds of meetings, ideally in the afternoon. So that's kind of what it looks like.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I mean, kind of looking behind the curtain a little bit, it's you know, the just like us, like that you accomplish so much, but like that you have a routine that gets you through it and knowing a little bit about what that is, I think is helpful. Um, like at the end of the day, what makes it all worthwhile for you? Like what is that thing um that brings you home?
Well, I think I'm really lucky to be able to focus my energy and curiosity and my writing skills and speaking skills on a topic that's really interesting to me and that is always changing. There's always something new happening with technology and its application to the practice of law. And I'm also really fortunate to have this wonderful community in the legal tech space, of which you're part. Like all these other lawyers that are kind of are interested in the same thing that I am, that get geek out about it and get really excited about it, where most other people will just be like, "You're such a geek. That's so boring." Like, but we get all excited about it, and also to be part of a company that, in a different way than my legal tech colleague, my lawyer friends that like tech, also get really excited about it, and to be part of a company that is, you know, I think in the cutting edge and leading, and has some of the best products that are helping make lawyers' lives better every day. And, there's a lot of value in that. And to feel like that you're doing something that's really helping your colleagues both understand tech and providing the tech that makes their days easier is um, it's a cool thing. And it's also cool just to be part of a tech company, especially from Rochester, New York, and get a lot of the benefits of being part of a tech company that was never something that I understood was a job. Was not on my radar until I got hired by one, really, or until I got into this space, maybe.
Well, I completely agree with you about the importance of community. And I know that you've built quite a community yourself. I mean, you have over 200,000 followers on LinkedIn. And, the writing that you put out there, the followers that you have is a testament to how valuable people view that and that you're a trusted, source of information and wisdom about that. Um, and I also wanted to take the opportunity to thank you so much for volunteering as a judge for the American Legal Technology Awards this year. Really appreciate it.
Of course. Yeah, no, that's another great initiative that I'm really thrilled to be part of because it gives people, an award. It gives them credit for all the work that they do and gets them the recognition they deserve. And it's great to be a part of that too. It's a great initiative.
Well, thank you. And with that, I'd just like to ask you, like, for people that are watching and listening, they want to keep in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn because that is the primary platform I'm on right now. Oddly enough, I don't think I would have predicted that when my book came out in 2010. So either LinkedIn or my the email the address that you can use is nikki.black@mycase.com. So it's niki.black@mycase.com, mycase.com.
Fantastic. And any final words, like any final word of advice that you would have for people that are watching?
To find something that they love and pursue it. And it sounds corny, but I think that oftentimes things will come of it if you get into that community, whatever that community is, and you make connections and you are doing something you really enjoy. I think it ultimately all falls into place.
Thank you, Nikki. It was a pleasure having you on.
Thanks so much. I really enjoyed the conversation.
And everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. See you next time.
Thank you so much for watching the latest episode of the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. To keep in the loop about upcoming episodes, please subscribe to LawDroid Manifesto and you'll get notified. Thanks for watching. See you next time.